Big economic changes in business and labor took place from 1860 to 1900, including the rise of big business, including new corporations, the acquisition of more Indian lands and resources, often by force, and the formation of labor unions due to rising economic inequality. This map shows railroads in 1890, which expanded markets to the west. Railroad companies were the first to use the corporation to create giant companies. Railroads also accelerated the acquisition of Indian lands and resources. Railroads transformed American capitalism in the late 1800s through their use of the corporation to raise private capital in impressive amounts. Corporations were large businesses that under the law had the ability to pool capital from investors. Corporate power had been strictly limited before the Civil War in order to prevent monopolies, which gain control of a commodity or service in a particular market and are able to dictate prices. Despite the concern over monopolies, lawmakers allowed corporations to expand during the Civil War to provide services the government could not afford. Railroad corporations received special government treatment, as illustrated in this political cartoon. They were granted public lands in the West with very little oversight and were widely accused of corruption and greed, with little concern for the public good. New laws also granted corporations limited liability, which protected them from being held accountable for debt to banks and other lenders. After the war, railroad monopolies were able to squeeze out competitors. Farmers, lumber dealers, and mining companies complained that the railroads overcharged and were able to force down prices paid for raw materials that were delivered by rail. The ability of corporations to pool large amounts of capital from investors made larger projects possible for better or worse, such as the Transcontinental Railroad that linked the east and west coasts. It was completed in 1869 when the Union Pacific and Central Pacific Railroads linked their lines together in Utah. This revolutionized the ability to ship goods and people across the United States and sped up the conquest of the Western territories. The expansion of railroads contributed to the near extinction of bison in the late 19th century due to overhunting, because rail enabled hunters to ship their parts to distant markets. Bison had lived in most parts of North America before the arrival of Europeans, but by the late 19th century were only found in the Great Plains, where Native Americans had come to rely on them for survival. White hunters were only interested in bison parts that could be easily shipped and sold. The skins, tongues, and bones, which were ground and used as fertilizer, as shown in this photo of bison skulls being collected. Bison were not domesticated on the plains as cattle were because they had a wilder temperament and can easily escape from most fencing systems. Bison were, in effect, replaced by domesticated cattle. By 1889, the total bison population was estimated to be just over 1,000 animals, and only 85 of those were free-ranging. Others were in a federal herd at Yellowstone National Park, in zoos, or in private herds. Industrialization is the process in which a society is transformed from a primarily agricultural society into one based on the manufacturing of goods and services. Along with technological changes, the process of industrialization entailed profound social changes. Work that had been performed by hand or with animals was now done with machinery that was increasingly powered by fossil fuels. Traditional craftspeople who had been economically independent became wage-earning employees of large corporations, and class divisions sharpened and led to the rise of national labor movements that battled industrial tycoons.